Hello, welcome to the live stream. One of the last Sunday live streams we're going to be doing for a while. We're gonna have, I think, 3 more Sunday live streams, and then we are gonna have to switch to another day, which I will tell you more about why that is going to happen at some point in the future. But we're searching for a new day, and I'd like some feedback on it. But hello, welcome. Glad to see you all. K-Walk Comedy says, Happy Sunday. Newbold1 says, oh, hello, can see and hear. Great. It is lovely to see you all. The donut today is really something. I'm not usually a fan of interesting. That one is off. Let's skip that then. Well, I really thought the overhead camera was going to be on, but it is not. Okay. The donut for today is a cookies and cream fritter. So it has like actual vegan Oreos inside of it. So instead of fruit in a fritter, it has vegan Oreos. So yeah, it's really a lot going on there. Aaron says, oh no, I forgot to edit my stream to redirect. Hopefully people make it over here. I hope they do too. It is seriously lush looking. It is an aristocrat of donuts. I like that. The donut did kill the stream. There's quite a lot going on. I hope it's good. I'm not a huge fan of chocolate, but like the folks that work at the donut shop said it wasn't that heavy on chocolate, so I think I'll be able to handle it. It's also a honkin' donut. It's like the size of my face. So it's really a lot of donut going on there. I need a good donut because I am talking about the debt ceiling, which is probably one of the most frustrating things to talk about for anybody who has a background in financial markets and economics, because it's just ridiculous that we keep having this discussion. The debt ceiling is unique to America, and it is really risky to particularly the American financial markets. But since America is the largest economy in the world, and since about 25% of our debt is held by foreign governments, it's important to the world. It's important to individuals. It's important to interest rates, the economy, financial markets, people's pensions, veterans benefits, food stamps. Like, the debt ceiling is important. So, we can talk about why it's important. I don't want to get too deep into why this keeps happening from a political perspective. Instead, I want to focus on the consequences of this from an economic perspective, because I think it can be really hard to understand. The debt ceiling is a pretty abstract concept. It's not something that makes a ton of sense. Like, if you're used to the idea of like, well, why can they not borrow money? Like, I can balance my checkbook. Why can't the government? It can be really difficult to understand why it's different in this case. And then also, there's so much political brinkmanship that happens with this. It's become a pet project in the past 10 years of Republican congressional members, not mainly the mainstream Republicans, but it tends to be kind of the more fringe Republicans in the US to play a game of chicken with the debt ceiling and use it as leverage for other debates. And we're seeing that once again in the United States. Inevitably, the debt ceiling will have to be raised. And the political brinkmanship that happens is just exhausting, frankly. But unlikely to stop, because it is one of the few bargaining chips that you get when you have a Congress that's on one side and a president that's on the other. We see this happen a lot, but it is literally a game of chicken. They are racing. The debt ceiling is racing this way, and the Republicans in Congress are racing this way. So we can talk a little bit about what it is, just help you understand it. And if you already understand it, hopefully I will add some interesting facts about the history of it. Aaron says you have to post your thumbnail sooner next time. Yeah, I know. I really procrastinated on posting the thumbnail. I didn't know what to talk about. I had a very dramatic week in my like personal life, and I just kept being like, should I do another plan with me? But anyway, I just couldn't decide what to talk about. I also had such a dramatic week that I have not finished my work, so I am going to have to finish on deadline after this live stream writing, which I am a little annoyed at myself about. Eric says, no worries, I got it teed up and cut over myself. Well, thank you for coming on over. Oh, right, it's the Super Bowl right now. When does it start? Should I Google this? Carl says, pre-show ad is from Borrego Springs is California marijuana safety. Munchies for all. Interesting. Do people watch the Super Bowl high? I mean, I know like some people do, but is that like a common thing? It seems like it would be. I have enough trouble following football. I can't imagine being in an altered state and then also trying to understand football, because it's definitely not my. It's not a sport I really understand. For some reason, the clock stops a lot in football. It's very confusing. I feel like if you were high, you would be stressed out by that. But I guess it is like Super Bowl in the United States is pretty much a holiday devoted to eating food with friends. And then like there's something playing on the television and then watching commercials. So I could see how that could be fun in a while high. I feel like football is more of a beer sport than getting high. Yeah. Angela says, I forgot the Super Bowl was supposed to be aired today. I definitely forgot the Super Bowl was going to be aired today. All right. Go Eagles. Who else is playing? Eagles are Philadelphia? Am I right? Do I know a sports thing? I did think about when I realized it was a Super Bowl, which I once again forgot again, but earlier this week when I realized it was a Super Bowl today, I was like, should I do an entire stream about figure skating? Because one of my most viewed live streams was about Kamila Valieva, the Russian teenager that at the Olympics was essentially accused of doping. Well, she had a positive test for doping. She wasn't just accused of doping. She had a positive test for doping. And then because of that, it is now, this week was the year anniversary of the other teams that participated in the team event with Kamila Valieva still not getting their medals. No one has gotten their medals, despite skating. All the other athletes having clean tests. And Kamila is still being paraded around as a national symbol in Russia, as being persecuted by the Western media. This is despite the fact that both her A and probably her B samples, because they didn't fight asking for a B sample test. Anyway, I thought about doing a 1-year anniversary stream about my sport, figure skating, just to like tee up some sports coverage. But New World One says, I deliberately forgot the Super Bowl. Yeah, you like American football, right? But you only like the Bengals, which I don't think they are in. Eagles is Philly. Thank you. I know that. Okay. Here's a question I have. Why are the KC Chiefs not renamed? Because they do like really racist like fan chants and stuff like that. And I'm just like a little confused about why they don't get renamed. Because a lot of the other teams have been renamed, like the Washington team and the Cleveland teams. So yeah, I don't want to misrepresent. I'm not really all that tied to either team. Just provide the obligatory boosterism. Yeah, they really should be. I thought when Aaron and I heard this on the radio that they were in the Super Bowl, we were like, wait, didn't they change their names by now? No rename. Welcome to America. Hasn't it been a conversation for a really long time? It's like, I know that it's not an outright slur in the same way that that the Washington team and the Cleveland team's names were, but like, maybe just no? I don't know. Well, we are what we are at our core. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, there's a lot going on. We've exhausted my extent um of we've exhausted my extent of football knowledge. Eric says, I know when Washington and Cleveland moved and it got accomplished, the excuses not to follow suit became less and less. Yeah, I do think that like once you make the argument that from what I understand, bigger teams, I think the Washington team they're called the Nationals now, right? I think the Washington team is like a much bigger team, as is the Cleveland team, as far as I understand. Apparently Kansas City is one of the NFL's darlings right now, so it's unlikely. Interesting. Why are they darlings? I mean, I guess they're in the Super Bowl, which is the end, right? This is the end goal of the teams. They're the Commanders. Is the Nationals baseball? I'm sorry, y'all. I can give you info about figure skaters. We had the 4CC going on, the Four Continents figure skating international competition is happening, and it happened in Colorado Springs, and it was appalling to see some of the skaters. This was just this weekend. I'm filling in with sports knowledge I have. It was appalling to see. The skaters were like collapsing on the ice at the end of their programs because Colorado Springs is like 5,000 feet above sea level or something. It's at a very high altitude. And a lot of people train there, like that. It's like the head for the United States Figure Skating Association. But there were teams that were crawling to the kiss and cry, like crawling after their programs, and they looked completely, and it looked scary. So yeah, Cleveland was the baseball team which changed its name. Oh, okay. I'm good. I understand sports. I'm sorry. Oh. This is a history-making game, apparently. There are two black quarterbacks, brothers playing against each other, and a female black coach on one of the teams. I didn't even know there were that many female coaches, period, in the NFL. So that's exciting. Yay. I'm excited that it's a history-making game. I feel like football is a sport that has had a lot of black players this is my perception as someone who's not that knowledgeable. A lot of black players in like the back filler positions, essentially. Not the filler, I guess they're important parts of a team, but like football teams are huge. So like a lot of the kind of lower paying, shorter career, very dangerous positions. And then a lot of white players at sort of the forefront positions. That's my perception, at least in the like professional sports. New World One says they've been increasing the number of women in the league in general. Finally. So it's good. Great. That's very exciting. I mean, I also think that aren't they trying to have a conversation maybe about the safety of football? Like, are we done with that? Did we just decide concussions are okay? Because I know a lot of football players have like TBIs. So, they get like a special kind of traumatic brain injury from football, I guess, because of the way that they take hits. I don't know. It seems really unsafe, but also figure skating is really unsafe, and we don't even wear any protective equipment. So, CTE, I think, is the name of the traumatic brain injury they get. Which is like where it's like you're shaking around in your skull, I think. But it's pretty much like only seen in former football players, I think. All right. I want to eat this donut, so we have to talk about the topic other than Super Bowl, which is a thing I'm not very knowledgeable about. So we really shouldn't labor on that too long because I'm not going to be able to add much content to it. So let's talk about the debt ceiling, something I do, in fact, know a lot about. So essentially, what is the debt ceiling? Debt ceiling is this limit imposed by Congress that says we can't borrow more than a certain amount of money in the U.S. The government can't borrow more than a certain amount of money. And this is important to understand why this is different than the deficit. The debt ceiling is how much we can borrow. So it's this like magical line that we have. And the Treasury is the one who is usually issuing these bonds. So the Treasury is a separate, independent part of the government. It's separate from Congress. However, it has to obey laws. why do we issue debt? Why is there any debt whatsoever in the government? Well, if you are the government and you want to buy things, so in this case, this would be things like what we call entitlement programs, which would be Medicare, Social Security, food stamps, subsidies for housing, clean energy, whatever it might be. All of that money has to come from somewhere. If you're a government, you essentially only have two primary ways to raise money. You can raise money through taxes, and then you can raise money by issuing bonds. And bonds are issued by governments and corporations generally. The US bonds are called treasury bonds. They are also bills, which are short-term versions of these, but we're going to just talk about bonds right now. What happens when you borrow money when a bond is issued is the government says, hey, here's an $1,000 bond, and it's a 30-year bond. And they say, okay, well, we will pay you, let's say 2% interest on this bond. So every year they would pay you semi-annually, because bonds pay semi-annual interest. They would pay you 2 chunks of interest each year. And you would get that interest. So you'd put $1,000 in a bond, kind of protect it, and then it would provide you some interest each year. And at the end of 30 years, you'd get your $1,000 back. And so it's saying, hey, government, I want a pretty low risk investment. So U.S. Treasury securities are generally considered the safest investment out there. And lots of sovereign governments, people, individuals, investors, and corporations buy U.S. Treasury bonds, and they buy it to balance against other riskier parts of their portfolio. So being invested in things like stocks, which is not a debt, instead it is buying a piece, it's called equity, it's buying a piece of a company. Stocks tend to be higher risk. Also, bonds, there are bonds issued by corporations that are usually will give you a much higher interest rate because they are considered more risky, right? So if you're a really good company, like a really good corporation that always pays back its debt on time, just like you as a human, you would have a good credit rating. If you have a good credit rating and you borrow money for a car, for example, you will pay a lower interest rate, right, than someone who has a crap credit rating. If they're bad at paying back their bills in the past, then they will pay a higher interest rate because there's more risk to that. So corporations that are profitable, always likely to pay back their debt, they will have a good credit rating. Standards & Poor's, when it rates bonds, it will rate them between AAA, and I believe the lowest that it does is D. I have to double check because there's 2 different rating systems. I can't remember it, but AAA is the best. U.S. Treasury debt, we are very good at paying it back. So we always pay it back, but we'll talk about why the debt ceiling has kind of made things risky. But we've always had what is called a AAA rating, which means that we pay very little interest because we pay back our debt. So the interest rates are relatively low, but they provide a little income to your portfolio and they help balance out some of the more risky things you might have, stocks or corporate bonds that might be a little more high risk, or even what's called junk bonds. Junk bonds are extremely high risk, but they'll pay very high interest. Now, who else issues bonds other than corporations and the U.S. government? Well, most foreign governments will issue bonds. And this is one of the ways, other than taxes, that they will raise revenue in order to pay for the kinds of programs that they want. The bridges that they want to build, the corn subsidies they want to provide, the schools, all sorts of things that they provide funding for. The function of government, right? Healthcare in most countries. Some countries are really bad at paying back their debt. So, we saw this back in 2010, 2011 with the Euro bond crisis, which was essentially the Eurozone, which is countries that use the euro as their denominated currency, having the risk of Greek and Italian bonds at the risk of default, because essentially they didn't have enough money. They were not, their bonds, they were bad at paying back their bills. Both had pretty non-functional governments, which sounds really familiar these days. Had pretty like obstructionist, complicated governments, and they couldn't go out and issue bonds in the same way, right? Because they had a shared currency with these other countries, but they had a sovereign, they had sovereign debt. And they had a very low credit rating, Greek and Italian bonds, because there was a risk of default at any point. And so when it comes to, the general rating of bonds in countries, it has a lot to do with people's confidence that that government will pay it back. So who buys these U.S. Treasury bonds? Well, the largest chunk of them is actually bought by the government itself. Social Security, which is the social retirement program in the United States. It's the government pension, essentially. Social Security buys a big chunk of those bonds as a way to invest their money and get a bit of a return, but in a relatively safe place because the U.S. pays back its debt. Another, place is other government pensions. So like postal workers, pensions, and railroad workers, those will all buy bonds. And then the next biggest chunk is individual investors and corporations that want to buy bonds to balance their portfolio. I have U.S. Treasury bonds in my portfolio, which is a very standard thing to have in your portfolio. As you get closer to retirement age, people generally buy more and more bonds and fewer stocks as a percentage of their overall portfolio because they want to preserve the what they have in there. When you're trying to grow, you'll usually want more equity because that has higher potential for growth. And then as you've already got a, chunk of change in your retirement portfolio, you'll start to have more and more bonds. You'll shift your allocations to buy more and more bonds because bonds will usually preserve the principal as long as they get paid back on time. And then kind of the final chunk of who buys U.S. Treasury bonds is foreign governments. So about 25% of U.S. debt is owned by foreign governments. And this is where you've probably heard the rhetoric of China. We all owe all of our money to China, which is simply that our debt is considered valuable. It's considered low risk. It's considered a good investment. And so just like we as a country in the United States invest in U.S. Treasury bonds in our Social Security funds and our pension funds, other governments go, oh, U.S. denominated bonds. It's the world reserve currency. They are the largest economy in the world. They pay back their debt on time. This is a good place to put some of our investments. This is especially true in countries that have a much smaller economies than the US and aren't able to essentially invest in their own debt because maybe there's a bunch of reasons for that, right? Their economy does not look the same as the US economy, which is a pretty unique economy. The two largest holders it's not actually China anymore. It's been Japan for the past several years. So Japan is the largest holder of US debt. And that probably has a lot to do with their depreciating currency and their, a lot of reasons why Japan feels a need to be invested in US bonds. Then after that is China. And part of that is because China has such a high it has such a high savings rate compared to the United States, meaning of what they generate, how much of it gets put into savings. So one of the reasons that China holds on to U.S. Government bonds is actually so that they can practice some of the currency arbitrage that they do in order to keep the yuan, their currency, competitive with the US dollar vis-a-vis the yuan. And one of the ways that they can do that, some people call it currency manipulation, but at the very least, it is strategically buying US currencies so that they can keep their yuan at the point where it's cheap for us, the world, but particularly the US, which is their largest trading partner, So that as US consumers, as US companies, if we're buying things from China, the Chinese yuan is priced in such a way that it is cheap for us to buy goods from there. If the exchange rate of the US dollar to the Chinese yuan was, the same as the US dollar vis-a-vis the pound is a bad example right now. So let's say the Swiss franc. If we had the Swiss franc exchange rate that we do, we wouldn't be buying. There's a reason we don't import a lot of consumer goods or raw materials from Switzerland. And when we do, they tend to be luxury products. That's because the Swiss franc does not have an advantageous export economy exchange rate. Switzerland's economy is mainly based on the knowledge economy, and because of that, the exchange rates are a little less important to them, but they are not optimizing so that other people will buy goods from them. So, yay, Japan. Debt then donut. Yes, very important. Okay, so are we caught up on understanding why we have debt in the first place, like why we have bonds? So the debt ceiling itself is this arbitrary line that's put in place by Congress, and it was put in place in 1917, that essentially says, okay, the Treasury can't go out issuing bonds in order to pay back our bills above this amount. And it is very unique that we have it. No other country in the world pretty much has it. The only other countries that kind of have it are Germany has this sort of Germany has this debt brake, which essentially can like slow down borrowing. They are also very adverse to inflation because of their experience with hyperinflation in the interwar periods. So, as we've talked about before, when it comes to the euro and how Germany kind of runs the euro economy. Japan and Denmark do have debt limits, but for a variety of reasons, they essentially don't pose serious constraints on their government's actions. Denmark's is set so high. They do have a ceiling of how much can be borrowed without like an act of Congress, but it is so freaking high that it's not relevant. So in Japan, it's really not the same, and part of that has a lot to do with Japan's kind of semi-unique economy. The United States, we essentially have said, Congress has to approve us borrowing more debt because we don't want to get into a ton of debt. And we are in a ton of debt. Currently, our deficit, which is the gap between what we bring in taxes and what we are spending on various programs, is the largest it's ever been, and it is equal to about 122% of GDP. So that means the amount of gross domestic product, how much the US economy produces in a year, is less than the gap right now between what we're spending and what we are bringing in taxes. Tax reform and what we bring in taxes is our excessively complicated tax system here in the US will not raise enough money for us, essentially. And so, usually Congress, prior to, in the early days of America, we've always essentially said Congress is in charge of deciding what they're spending and how much debt the Treasury can issue. But it wasn't really a big deal. But in 1917, on the precipice of a war, they put this ceiling in place to essentially say, we don't have time to all get on our trains that we have to travel across the United States to Congress in order to issue to approve every kind of spending that you need in a war, right? Because wars are one of the things that raises the amount of borrowing the US government does, because wars are expensive. They're also very good for economies, but we'll kind of move on from that. But I don't have time to unpack that bit of it. But, it used to be that the debt ceiling was there because we did not have the ability to do quick votes when we needed to do spending. So instead, what has happened is Congress has agreed to all this sort of spending. They've agreed to Social Security, Medicare, schools, all the things that a government funds, but they haven't agreed to the mechanism by which the Treasury needs to pay for it. This is not us going out as a country and being like, ooh, I really need that new luxury bag. We need to have a discussion about the new luxury bag and if we can afford to buy it on credit. No, we've already had that discussion. We've already decided to buy that luxury bag, which in this case is mostly Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid, the part that is paid for by the federal government. Like, we have already agreed to buy these things. This is saying, oh, we're not actually going to pay the credit card bill when it shows up. These are already obligations that the federal government has. So we already reached this breaking point of the fact that the Treasury had run out of the ability to borrow the amount that it needs to, which is currently 30.92 trillion. That's how much we have debt-wise. It's a lot. 30.92 trillion, a little crazy. So once again, that is 22% more than the economy has produced this year. So, we have quite a lot of money, but please remember we are the largest economy in the world. People are willing to buy our debts. But on January 19th, 2023, we reached the point where Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said, we out of money, yo. So they have these, what they call extraordinary measures, which is that the Treasury, while they're not able to issue any more bonds, they've hit that top. In order to meet their obligations, they have some wiggle room by essentially rating funds that they have. So what they are rating is retirement funds, government retirement funds, the pools of money that they have, and like the Social Security Trust and various other things, which doesn't mean that people aren't necessarily, it doesn't mean that that veterans are not going to get their benefits or that Social Security retirees are not going to get their benefits. They essentially have a pot of money that's usually invested, and they can take some money out of those pot of money. It's sort of like finding a bunch of envelopes of cash that you have for emergencies. This is the Treasury's version of an emergency. So they do what's called what is called extraordinary measures and say, okay, we are going to borrow money from these until someone will let us issue more bonds. Yellen said that it's probably around June that we run out of the ability to pay this. And remember, this is not like, this is us paying the interest back on things that we've already paid for. Yes, the luxury bag is entitlement obligations. These are the luxury bag is things that we have already decided to spend money on. We are out of money. We are very, very much out of money. So this is why it's really like dangerous. It's just generally dangerous. So much of the global financial system relies upon the perception that American Treasury debt is risk-free. The Treasury bills, the 90-day T-bill, which is a Treasury-issued bill, is actually used in financial calculations as the risk-free rate. So whatever interest rate that they are paying is what is considered the risk-free rate when you are looking at the performance of various financial obligations. So, and this is used all over the world. This is not just in United States calculations. And that is because it is generally considered one of the safest investments you can have because the US government is very good at paying back their debt. So, there are other reasons. Money market funds, which are what are used to essentially provide some liquidity. They are considered very safe. Money markets are considered very safe. They are not speculative investments. Some individuals might be invested in them, but money market funds are actually used by large institutions as sort of like where their slush money lives. Money market funds hold another 338 billion of treasuries. And so if they're not getting that interest rate on that, it has all sorts of downstream effects. And And we've already seen what has happened to the financial markets when we started having these Congress pretends that they're not going to raise the debt ceiling discussions, which happened during Obama's term. 10 years ago, that during Obama's term, Mitt McConnell said that he wanted to get budget concessions from President Obama. And Standard & Poor's was so upset about the prospect of the United States Congress saying that they weren't going to pay back their debt that they actually lowered our ratings. So we went from a AAA to a AA rating, which still sounds good, but it is a little unnerving to have what is considered to be one of the safest investments in the world not be at that top rating. And so one of the really scary parts about this when it comes to generally the US currency being at risk, the US Treasury bonds being at risk, is that what happens when you say what is considered the risk-free rate is no longer at the best credit rating. That means that interest across the board is going to go up, because if there's something that's considered more risky than US Treasury debt, which is most things, even the best corporations, their debt is considered more risky than US government debt because the government can print money and corporations can't. If their interest rate on what is considered risk-free goes up, then everyone else interest rates go up. And if you're someone who's had to borrow any money lately, you know that interest rates are not that low right now. I mean, they're still low on a historical level, whatever. But interest rates are going up because we are using this right now as a tool. It's called monetary policy. We are using monetary policy as a way to fight inflation. You have to raise the interest rates to fight inflation. If we are raising the interest rates even more, this has huge downstream effects. If they actually can't pay their bills, if the US government has to not pay their bills, that means veterans are not getting their benefits. It means Social Security retirees might not get their benefits. It means programs might be cut, like schools. Any sort of things. We've already seen what was called a federal government shutdown, which is essentially, it was over the budget crisis, but the same thing could happen where essentially all of the functions of the US government stop because they don't have the money to pay for it. And what would happen in that case, US government spending is responsible for about 4% of US GDP. And if that grinds to a halt, there is going to be much more outsized effects from it, right? We are going to see if people are not getting their Social Security benefits, we are going to have huge impacts on people's pocketbooks and their housing security, all sorts of things. If they don't get their check that they've relied on, that they've paid into, then they are not going to, that siren is there to tell you that this would be an emergency, that they're not going to be spending any money. That has effects on our economy overall because our economy is a consumer-based economy. We need to be spending money in order to keep it rolling. If that economy doesn't keep rolling, then we're going to see even more recessionary situations. It is a crisis if we do not raise the debt ceiling. And it's not just for the United States. It's important even if you don't earn your income in US dollars. It's important because other governments hold this currency, hold these bonds. It's important because the financial markets use the US dollar as their reserve currency. Transactions on the financial markets are done in US dollars by and large. So this is important regardless. There is a lot of the foundations of the current financial markets and how the world operates that is based upon this security. So, this has gotten raised over almost, I think, 80 times since 1917 when we first implemented this. Once again, this is a unique and unusual thing. Other countries don't have this debt ceiling where they just fight about if they're going to pay the bills that they've already acquired. You can have discussions about if you're going to spend the money, but once you've spent the money, having a discussion about whether or not you're actually going to pay back the people that you borrowed in order to spend the money is really concerning. One of the other things, if they don't come figure this out before what's called the X date, which is the date at which we stop having envelopes of money available for the Treasury to do kind of financial accounting back and forth on. If they don't find anything out before the X date, which we think is around June, that's what Treasury Secretary said. If they don't figure it out, federal government contractors are not going to get paid. Military members are not going to get paid. We're not going to be able to pay, all of the investment that we are doing to help Ukraine in the war against Russia right now. All of that is very important. Minnie says, I should understand this. All of my income is earned in US dollars. But I don't. I think Bank of Canada does this. They keep raising interest rates. Yeah, all countries in the world are pretty much raising interest rates right now because all countries in the world are facing inflation, except Japan. But Japan is very special. I could do an entire live stream on Japan's economy. I'm going to be in Japan next month, so maybe I should do a live stream on Japan's economy while I'm there. I think that would be kind of fun. Yeah, but absolutely, this is a thing that this is a thing that all countries are doing right now because we're all fighting inflation because during COVID, governments were spending because they had to spend, right, to keep people alive. So Eric says, I'm up for Japan economy. It's very unique. It's got a lot of particular challenges, so I think it would be kind of fun to talk about. So, 2011 was the last really close call that we had with the debt ceiling, but we keep having these discussions. It is notable that, when the Republicans that are concerned about this debt ceiling, when they had their own president in office, President Trump, they raised the debt ceiling 4 times. And $3 trillion of that was actually done even before the COVID spending kicked in. But as soon as they can use this debt ceiling discussion as leverage with a Democratic president, then we start to have this discussion again. But it's silly brinkmanship because it has to be raised. This game of chicken that they're playing, it has $1 trillion stakes. It is not a small kind of discussion. So what would be the best answer to fix it when it comes to solving it? Well, the simplest answer would be just for Congress to raise the debt ceiling. They could also get rid of the debt ceiling. There is no reason that they need to have a debt ceiling this high. There are some kind of solutions that happen without Congress, but all of these carry a lot of risk with them. One of the more creative solutions is that the Treasury actually issues a $1 trillion coin, which is very weird. But essentially, they would mint a $1 trillion coin, and then they could use that accounting. It would be an accounting trick, essentially. But because that indicates that things are so risky and dangerous, that still doesn't lead us down we still have the same risk that we have of people not wanting to invest in U.S. Treasury bonds. Another option that the Treasury could do without Congress would be issuing ultra high interest bonds. So right now, U.S. Treasury bonds are paying about 5%, kind of depending on the denomination of the bond. So only the face value of the bonds counts towards the debt limit. So theoretically, the Treasury could, in issue, sell $1 billion worth of 1-year bonds with an interest rate of 105%. So they would be able to, essentially issue $2 trillion worth of, or $2 billion worth of debt, but only cost $1 billion. That could be a way that they would do it because only that face value counts towards this debt limit. Angela is asking all of the very good questions. Would it be bad to get rid of the debt ceiling? No. Having limits to how much you can borrow is important, but those limits should happen when discussing the budget. They shouldn't necessarily happen after we've already paid for it. The U.S. Government is unique. We're the only ones that have this debt ceiling. Why do we have it? Because we originally had it because we didn't want the government to go out we didn't want the Treasury to go out and issue bonds because it took days, even a week, for people to get, for congressional members to get to Congress in order to vote on spending and issuing debt for things like wars, notably 1917, the Great War. So no. What was the economy during the Black Plague? How did we bounce back then? Well, the economy was much less complicated back during the Black Plague. There wasn't usually that much sovereign debt issued. So that's part of it. That's a really interesting discussion, but too complicated for me to discuss. The U.S. economy didn't exist because we didn't exist during the Black Plague, and we certainly didn't have the largest GDP in the world. But there was still debt issued. Like, debt still existed during the times of the Black Plague. A lot of that debt was actually issued by kind of smaller versions of that. The economy was swap a goat for 10 loaves, maybe. I mean, you still paid taxes, but you'd pay like one goat tax to whoever the holder, either the king, whoever was in charge of your land. Eric says, we used to be on the gold standard too at the time. Couldn't spend more than we held in gold. Yeah, also very good point. Going off that. So we buy something and we want to go back and check the budget. Sounds like they need a financial class more than I do. I agree with that. I mean, the thing is that this isn't about the finances. This is the rhetoric that is used when they're debating the debt ceiling on the congressional floor. But the debt ceiling is so important to raise, and everyone knows that it's actually just used, these discussions about fiscal responsibility 10 minutes too late, that are happening in Congress are actually just used as negotiation tactics for other things, because we know in the end they're going to raise the debt ceiling, and we know what absolute chaos it would be if they didn't. The Black Death, that is, and they mentioned the economy towards the end in the Puppet History episode. Interesting. I went in for 12 items or less and ended up spending $70. I planned 20. They need to get a handle on this inflation. I agree. They do need to get a handle on this inflation, which is why the interest rates going up is good. But we don't want the interest rates to go up too high because it'll cool down the economy too much, and we're already in recessions. Jackie says, I know money is fake is an unhelpful take here, but I feel more than convinced that money is the weirdest thing humans have ever created. Agreed. And especially like the very sophisticated international macroeconomics that we've created. But yeah, money is fake, but that's also why we should probably allow the debt ceiling to go up. Debt ceiling is a scapegoat. That's a very good and correct measure. Like, you can be concerned about how much debt the U.S. is taking on, but you can't be concerned at the expense of not paying your bills. And they're using this in order to get other things that they want. $1 trillion coin sounds like the start of an Ocean's 11 heist movie. Yeah, I know. Wouldn't that also be like concerning to mint that $11 coin? There's also one other very legalistic kind of solution for this, short of Congress doing their job, which would be, there's an ignored provision of the 14th Amendment. I am not a lawyer, so I don't really understand how we could get away with this, but there is a section that states that the validity of American public debt shall not be questioned. So theoretically, that gives the Treasury the ability to just make valid debt without having to rely on Congress. But the issue is that if they did that, it would absolutely go to the Supreme Court. And if it went to the Supreme Court, it would now be at the mercy of 9 justices. And the other part of that problem, if it went not the way that we wanted it to go when it came to this, all of the bonds that Treasury had issued since that would be up for question, which could cause everything to be thrown into even more chaos than we currently have. So yeah, I mean, the debt ceiling in general only matters if the government runs a deficit. And the reason that we're running a deficit is we're not collecting enough tax revenue relative to the amount that we're spending on things. If they collect, like, let's say $1,000 in taxes and they spend $1,005 in spending commitments, it has to borrow $5. And right now it's about a 20% gap. So essentially about 80% of what we raise in tax revenue covers our spending commitments, but then about 20% needs to be issued by bonds. So yeah. Does this all teeter on the promise that Fort Knox is full of gold, when apparently it might not be? No, we're not on the gold standard anymore, so it's not important if Fort Knox is full of gold. We're not on the gold standard, so we do not meant above that. It's fiction, as noted by Jackie, but yeah, it's complete fiction. All right, I think it's time to eat this donut. I'm a little bummed that this camera appears to be off. Maybe if I just like switch it on, it'll... Ooh, yes, there we go. Look at that. Okay, we can do the donut then. I think it'll work. Yeah, there we go. All right, it's time for a donut, and then we can talk maybe a little bit more about some solutions or anything else. If you have questions, more questions about the debt ceiling, let's go. So, this is the donut, which is a it's a vegan cookies and cream fritter. So instead of having fruit in a fritter, which is a traditional fritter, it has like Oreo cookies that you can see. It's also huge, if you can't tell. This is a much bigger plate than I normally use. And then it's sprinkled on the top. I hope it's going to be good. Definitely time to reap the return of the donut investment. Agreed. Oh my gosh. It's good. It's not too chocolatey for me thus far. It's got such a mix of textures. It's like fluffy on the inside, crunchy on the outside. It's got this like Oreo kind of topping on it. Minnie, are you going to eat cake with us? I think you should, from your birthday. And happy belated birthday. Oh my gosh. You can see that Oreo's like inside. I can already tell this is probably going to be a pretty high donut rating. Even for someone who doesn't like chocolate, this is pretty solid. Debt and let them eat cake. I agree. The Oreo layer makes me think of legit French Choco croissant. Yeah, except it's crunchy, right? Like with a croissant, it's usually like a little creamy, and this is crunchy. Y'all, I'm giving it. It's 5 out of 5. High praise. And the fact that I like it when I don't normally like chocolate. It is not really chocolatey. It's more, I would say the cream flavor of the cookies and cream is more prominent, and the chocolate is really minor because I really don't like chocolate very much. The crunch is kind of what's brought to it. Minnie says, my cake is a store-bought McCain chocolate cake where I eat the whole thing to myself. That is how you should celebrate your birthday, is an entire cake to yourself. I can't believe instead of fruit, they put cookies in a, inside of a donut for a fritter. Man, this is like very good. I'm finishing it, y'all. Anybody have any other questions about the debt ceiling? Does it make sense? Someone said they didn't really understand how governments issue debt. And I think the easiest way to explain it is like how bonds work in general. Is, let's say you have a friend who wants to, let's say you know someone who wants to build a house, and they need capital to build that house. They need to be able to have the money to pay for all of the construction and supplies of it. And you have enough cash sitting around that you feel like you can help them out. And so you say, okay, I will give you $1,000 so that you can have it right now while you need to do construction. But you need to pay me a little bit of money, over the next, 10 years, let's say. I need you to pay me some interest on that, just so that I have some reassurance that you're, making good on it, and so that I make a little bit of money on my investment versus what I might do otherwise. And then at the end of 10 years, you'll pay me back all the principal because you will have already built the house, and you're ready to pay me back that principal that you've had. And that's kind of the basics of how bonds work. And bonds are issued by governments for all sorts of things. So in addition to these federal government bonds, which is what we're currently talking about, there's also what's called municipal bonds, otherwise known as muni bonds, not affiliated with Muni necessarily, the San Francisco Transit Agency. What muni bonds are, one, they can be really advantageous for people in high tax brackets because they're essentially can be double tax free where you don't have to pay any taxes on them. But municipal bonds are things that you'll often vote for. So, you hear about school bonds or parks bonds. And what that's saying is that you, as a taxpayer, have said that, oh, yeah, I agree that we need to have better parks. Or, in the case of Portland's school bond, kids should stop drinking out of lead-infested water in schools, and we need to pay a lot of money in order to fix that. Well, they issue bonds that say, okay, this is how much we need in order to do that. Muni bonds can be tied to two different sources. If they are voted on in taxes, they're essentially tax revenue. It's a little different. But if they are issued on the muni bonds are issued on the private market, they would be paid just the same as the bonds that I was kind of describing. And, war bonds are something that we have commonly used in the US, which is essentially they're issuing war bonds. This also happened in the UK. Like in World War II, I think all the governments were issuing them, which is you saying that you as an individual want to invest some money for a good rate of return, and the government needs money right now. So that would be a war bond. Canada matured all their savings bonds, and that's all I know on that. Interesting. I have not been following the Canadian savings bonds. That might be an interesting that might be interesting to kind of find more about that. Oh, interesting. Okay, they've all reached maturity, and that's why they had stopped earning interest. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. That was based on 2 seconds of Googling. The sheer scale of the numbers involved and the stakes makes it bewildering, really. Yeah, sometimes when I get a little stressed out, I just knock some zeros off the end in order to make it a little more comprehensible to me. But yeah, it's impossible to really understand how much physical money it would be. Uh, all right. I think we've talked about the U.S. Treasury debt enough. Can I turn this back to when we can move the live stream to? So I'm going to have a new schedule, and I'm going to be working starting 4:30 in the morning on Saturday and Sundays. So I'm not going to get off until 1:30 in the afternoon. That's Pacific time. And I feel like after waking up at 3:15, 3:30 in the morning, I'm not going to be super stoked about doing a live stream afterwards on Sunday. So I need to move the live stream. I was tempted to be like, oh, I could just do it at like 4 in the afternoon or something. But I think having been up since 3, I don't think it would be a quality live stream. So I need to move it to a different night. And I'm looking at Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights, and I feel like Fridays is probably not good because it'd have to be earlier. I was also considering like a midday stream on Monday, Tuesday, or Monday or Tuesday, where I would do it at like 11 a.m. or something like that, which would be good for the Europeans, but is kind of a bummer for people that are in the States and Canada and work a like regular 9 to 5. So I know a lot of people watch these on the replays, but I enjoy having the live chat. I was thinking the advantage of doing it on Tuesdays nights is that I get to say, see you next Tuesday because I'm like 12. The Tuesday nights, I don't know exactly what time I do it. If I do it like right after work, so I do it at like 5 p.m. my time, which would be 8 p.m. Eastern. Or if I would do it like, some sort of, I could also potentially do a Friday after work live stream. So start it at like 4 p.m. on Fridays and then be wrapped by, 5:30 p.m. So that would be a Friday night. I don't know if anybody has exciting Friday night plans and maybe wants to talk about economics or something like that. But I thought I would take a little bit of a poll while people are here. I'll probably ask on the Personal Finance Society, which I should probably mention. Down here, the Personal Finance Society, which is the Patreon supporters of Oh My Dollar. And I will also ask on the Oh My Dollar forums, which is the other place that you can go hang out. So I do a 4:30 a.m. wake up at 6 or 7 a.m. I need a nap around 2 p.m. and that's 6 or 7 a.m. Yeah, that's the thing is like, I don't want to push it much more than that. Tuesday night sounds good, 8 p.m. Eastern. Program changes for the best. Stay tuned for next Tuesday. Wednesday or Friday would be better for me, but I am just one person. Any weekday evenings will work for me. Okay, so it sounds like none of us are living very exciting lives where we're regularly out on weekday evenings. This is just a cozy chat. You can always watch it in replay, but I love to have people live in the chat. You like the see you next Tuesday. I am very amused by it. Maybe I will try out before I really have to switch over to the weekend schedule. I might try out like a random Tuesday night stream just to like test the waters and see who's able to do it. So that wouldn't be this Tuesday, but maybe the one following. So, I'll check in. Thank you all for giving me some feedback on that. I would be good with everything since even if I'm at work, I can listen in. That's great. I mean, it means that it's a little harder probably to chat while you're at work, but that's great. Eric says, I'm also open for Wednesday to keep Newbold 1 on the chat. It is important to have our UK representation here in the chat. Always nice to have Newbold 1's feedback. Okay, this is great. It sounds like it hasn't been super... It sounds like it hasn't been super rough generally. To like weekdays are just not totally out for anybody, at least that's like active in the chat right now. So that's good to know. I'm a little bummed to stop having to do them on Sundays, but I think realistically, like Minnie was saying, it's just not practical to expect that because I will be on the air for 4 hours on Sunday mornings. It's not practical that after waking up that early and talking on the air for 4 hours, I'm going to then be able to do a good live stream. And I would rather have a smaller audience or more people watching in the replay than have just do a poor live stream. Like if I'm really low energy, it's just not good. It's not fun for anybody. So yeah. New Build One says, is it a digital station? I can't talk on my journal. I don't want to talk too much about it. I don't want to like let the can out of the worms. But yes, the station that I will be on is both broadcast and it will be available digitally as well if you are abroad. But I'll give more details about that later. But I need to start planning for the move of the stream. We've been on Sundays. We had a little Saturdays for a while there for like a year or two, but we've essentially been doing weekend streams since early 2020. So it's been 3 years. I guess at some point you just got to change. You just got to accept that. There is not an NDA involved. I just don't want to jinx it on a personal level. I'll also say that there's not an NDA. I don't want to jinx it on a personal level, but also not everybody that needs to know about this in my life has been informed yet about what is happening. So I need to wait until all of my ducks are in a row before I go shouting about it. But yeah. Your body can't do the whole productive workday if you're up before sunrise. Agreed, which is why it is so hard in the winter where you have to be up before sunrise if you're going to get up before any time. And then the sun sets and you can only get like 5 hours of work done in January and December because your body is like, no. Yes, it's not an NDA. It's a non-jinx agreement. Well, but before we go, and before I try to finish on deadline and eat the last bit of this donut, why don't you tell me what you're looking forward to this week? I'd love to hear. We haven't done this in a while, but tell me what you're looking forward to this week. I am, like I mentioned, I got a lot of ducks to get in a row this week. So, but one of the things I'm looking forward to is we may do a planner stream next week because I have acquired new planner journal stuff going on. I may have gone to the stationery stores yesterday because I'm not going to have like Saturdays free anymore. I went out and did one of the Saturday morning activities that I do occasionally, which is PDX Coffee Outside, where we all like go to a park, show up on our bikes, and then make coffee in various like camp stoves and contraptions and just drink coffee and meet strangers. And it's very fun. I brought my full setup and made Turkish coffee and like served it on my, nice Turkish espresso cups and everything, which I've done a couple times. But after that, I should have gone home and written the thing that I now need to finish writing. But instead, I went to the Japanese bookstore and I also went to Ablation Papers, which is like a super fancy stationery store. And I may have acquired Traveler's Notebook. I didn't get the leather cover because I didn't really want to buy leather new. And I'm not sure I'm like in love with that, but I'm trying out the Traveler's Notebook format because I want to see if I could use it for a trip coming up. So, new merch acquired, not merch yet, but I'm reaching out with folks to game with, which will help me with the game I'm playing. Nerve-wracking, but fun. Ooh, exciting. Oh, Minnie has a not looking forward to. Sent me to a cardiologist. I have to test for them so they can tell me what my heart is doing. I hope the silver lining is that they'll be able to tell you what your heart is doing. Nothing is more frustrating than going and having to get more tests and then they don't tell you anything more. So I'm sending you good energy for having the tests tell you something useful and easily treatable. Yes, hope it all goes well. I hope we're sending you good wishes. Anybody else have something they're looking forward to this week? I think I'm looking forward to playing with planners and getting all my ducks in a row. One of which is I think I'm going to just like exhaustively clean the house. By the way, if you don't know, this is a time to shout out, but if you don't know, I have a channel called The House Files PDX with Aaron, and it is where we talk about the triplex we're building. So if you want updates on what the heck is going on with that project, because it's really happening, we're really building a freaking house. You should head over to the House Files PDX. It's linked down in the description. It's at the House Files PDX here on YouTube. It's a video podcast. It's also available on podcast platforms, but we're putting out episodes every Friday, and it's mostly exists to talk you out of building a triplex. We're doing this not to get like internet famous for our fantastical house design skills, which we don't really have. We are doing it as a documentation of the process for ourselves, but the comments are so great. People leave really long and informative comments, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. So if you've ever wondered like how a large multifamily, a small multifamily house gets built, and you want to know kind of the weirdness of it, or like understand custom homes and stuff like that, it kind of interesting because I'm learning as we do it. Watch the House Files. It's totally worth it. Fascinating, interesting, and good to know. Eric, your comments have been so helpful on the House Files. You've had quality comments. Going to the library, is that what you are looking forward to this week, or are you leaving right now? Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, I think that we've reached the end. I wish Minnie luck on echocardiogram, whatever is going on with that. I hope that your heart is happy and healthy and they are able to solve whatever's going on with it. And have fun gaming New Bold 1. And everyone else, stay safe, stay hydrated, and pet a cat if you have available. And I will see you all soon. Bye.